It's a mirror of life trapping, isn't it? Well, yes and no. People go in and they don't come out, nor can you talk with anybody inside. Somehow that's not quite the way you remember those mirrors work. This Skarda fellow showed up a few years ago with a band of raiders, and no one in the land has been safe since then. Whole villages have disappeared into this Skarda's mirror. Your band is approached by relatives of one of the victims, an adventurer like yourselves. You have to get that mirror of whatever it is, find this man, and get him out in one piece. The reward is more than adequate. Only problem is, no one out here can tell you what to expect once you get in, or even how to get there. That's what's written on the back of this module. It is not especially inspiring and sets the stage for a very frustrating adventure. Skarda's Mirror was published in 1987, written by Aaron Allston for D&D Expert for levels 5 to 8. It's a strange module, at times rigidly railroaded with a mix of interesting and boring scenes. This module does some things very well and some things terribly. It is worth noting that I have not playtested this module, I've only read through it, so perhaps some wonderful things will appear through play, which are not apparent from merely reading the module. In this review I will examine each section in some details, so there will be some spoilers ahead. The players are introduced to the adventure by a 2-page block of read-aloud text. The adventure is set in Karameikos, in the Mystara setting. The PCs learn of a magic user called Skarda, who used to raid villages at the head of a band of brigands, kidnapping whole populations. A brave adventurer discovered Skarda's location and his plot to overthrow the Duke of Karameikos. A battle ensued and Skarda's mansion was burned down, but Skarda himself disappeared. All that was left was a mirror of life trapping, which was captured and covered up, stashed in the keep of the adventurer Ritameron. One night, Ritameron decided to uncover the mirror to defend himself against an assassin. This released a monster from the mirror, which attacked Ritameron and the occupants of his keep. Now, Ritameron has disappeared into the mirror, and a beast is on the loose in his keep. The PCs must help. This introduction does many things wrong. It is much too long. Players will be sleeping by the end, and possibly the DM as well. It is quite convoluted, introducing lots of characters very quickly, most of which I have not mentioned. Few will be remembered, except perhaps Skarda and Ritameron. There is little incentive given to why the PC should help, except out of the goodness of their hearts. This can be mitigated if you spend some time before this adventure establishing a connection to Ritameron or some other NPCs mentioned. The introduction is all action which has happened off-screen, if you will, and would be much more effective and memorable if shown to the players somehow. You could show the aftermath of one of Skarda's raids on a now desolate and abandoned village. Showing is always more effective than telling. There's a page dedicated to describing the history of Skarda's mirror and its special abilities, which refer to rules I presume are found in the Dungeons & Dragons Immortals rules from 1986. It is revealed that the mirror is a gateway to a mini-plane created by an immortal, a plane with mirrored walls, floor and ceilings. The plane was designed for meditation and was entirely featureless to help settle the immortal's mind. We are introduced to Skarda, whose real name is Malek, and it is not clear why he adopted the disguise of Skarda. In the player's introduction, this ruse is uncovered, so I'm not sure of the purpose. It's not a revelation the players will care about. Malek, or Skarda, is obsessed with conquering the world, as that was the last thought that the immortal who created the mirror plane had when he left. Skarda has been using the mirror to kidnap hundreds of people and to hide an army within his tiny mirror plane. He's built buildings, farms, and a quarry to maintain the population. Skarda intends to take the mirror to the palace of Duke Stefan of Karameikos and release his army from the mirror, easily overthrowing the Duke. He then intends to use the same tactic in the palaces of every kingdom until he has conquered the world. After capturing the mirror, the adventurer Ritameron kept it covered, trapping Skarda and his minions within the plane for 2 years. Eventually, though, the mirror was uncovered and Skarda released a mirror beast, something the plane is able to create, and captured the adventurer before relocating the mirror. Extended backgrounds are a common occurrence in pre-written adventures and are normally longer than necessary. This one is no exception, and as tedious as most, despite including information which is, I suppose, necessary to understanding the adventure. The plot hooks presented are very bland and are simply various suggestions that the PCs should know somebody associated with the adventure before starting. It's suggested that the PCs are friends of Ritameron, thus they will willingly wish to save him, else they are perhaps related to him. Alternatively, the PCs can be hired to help in exchange for 2,000 gold pieces and a +2 sword. These hooks are the most bland and obvious imaginable, hardly worth including. The PCs could have lived in one of the villages that was raided, returning one day to find all their friends and family missing, or they could be seeking a mirror of life trapping for some reason, and their research has led them to a small town where one is supposedly discovered. The purposes of plot hooks should be presenting interesting ways to draw the PCs into an adventure. The ones presented here are so simple that any DM could pluck them from the top of their head in 2 seconds. So, onto the module itself. However you draw the players into the adventure, the first port of call is Ritameron's tower. The place is abandoned and watched over by a small group of soldiers that report seeing occasional movement pass across the windows within the tower. It is assumed that there are multiple ways that the PCs may enter the tower, a safe assumption for the suggested level of the adventure. The map of the tower is uninspiring. There is a DM version of the map with numbered rooms and a player map without the numbers. The player map includes secret doors and hatches for some reason. Within the tower lurks a mirror fiend, a denizen of Skarda's mirror world. This creature is able to teleport between and out of mirror shards that have been placed in almost every room in the tower. While inside a mirror, it is able to remain invisible and jump out at the most opportune moment. The idea is that the fiend will ambush the party several times before they figure out that destroying the mirror shards damages the beast. It is the setup for survival horror perhaps, something that D&D is not really best suited for. The fiend is supposed to do small amounts of damage before fleeing, conducting a war of attrition. It's an interesting idea which I think will be a little tricky to pull off. The mirror fiend looks somewhat like a giant baboon. A regular baboon also lives in the tower, just to confuse the players a little. There's also an ochre jelly and 4 sturges to be dealt with. The tower is very boring. Almost every room is dull and empty, and the players will tediously explore looking for evidence of Ritameron or for Skarda's mirror, neither of which are present. The tower is naturalistic and totally void of any treasure. Having explored the tower and killed the mirror fiend, the characters will have no further leads and may be frustrated in not knowing where to go next. In order to continue the adventure, the DM must commit the great sin of capturing the players through magic and overwhelming force. This is done by Skarda teleporting to the PC's location and displaying the mirror. They will receive a save against spells and are pulled into the mirror plane if they fail. A small army will emerge from the mirror to manhandle any that succeed in their save. Clearly, the players have no choice other than to enter the mirror world. There are suggestions that Skarda will pick off PCs one by one, learning of their locations through charmed associates of the PCs. This is quite a neat idea, but would be better if the adventure had given the players a few more clues to follow. However you orchestrate the PC's capture, it's quite likely that the players will be unhappy with this turn of events. To add insult to injury, as soon as they enter the mirror, the PCs will be ambushed by a force of 60 soldiers. At this point, the PCs have entered Skarda's mirror realm. and here we see some of the highs and lows of the adventure. The mirror world is about a mile long and is enclosed on all sides by mirrored glass. It is a truly fantastic place with great potential, but executed poorly, resulting in a bland and naturalistic place. The only image of the plane shows something quite different from what is presented in the text, and even this image makes the place look very boring. The DM's map is very uninspiring, each area arranged in an orderly fashion. The plane is always lit by an unceasing continual light spell cast upon the ceiling. Beneath the reflective ground is an obsidian-like rock, which is being quarried in the northeast section of the plane. This black rock has been used to construct the various buildings within the plane. There are even magical wells every 600 feet to supply perpetual clean water to the inhabitants. These last two factors are obviously included to explain how the plane is habitable for the thousands of soldiers and slaves that live here. It's all very pedestrian, and one wishes for glassy mirror hills and rivers and waterfalls of silvery water filled with sparkling mirrored fish, lit during the day by a white sun and caressed by a pale moon at light. Alas, a flat plane with a series of orderly rectangles instead. The PCs arrive through the mirror portal onto this platform, inexplicably far away from the rest of the plane's buildings. The platform is always guarded by 30 soldiers who exist here, according to the picture, without shelter, chairs, campfire, or, well, anything. There are 7 portals present here, also not shown in the picture. 6 of these do not work as their corresponding mirrors have been lost. The 7th links to Skarda's mirror, but cannot be used without a password. It is not revealed what the password is, or whether it was set by Skarda or by the plane's immortal creator. Skarda's home is a 2-story palace atop a mountainous ziggurat of black stone, again quite different from the image. Unforgivably, the interior of the palace has neither map nor details. The dungeons below are mapped, but if the players make the truly mad decision to seek Skarda in his home, the DM will need to map that himself. I would have expected Skarda's palace to be the most interesting place on the plane, and characters are bound to investigate it for treasure. After all, this version of D&D uses gold for XP. Treasure details are listed in the next episode, but only as a formality. The players are not actually expected to acquire it. The adventure suggests using the map of Duke Karameikos' hunting lodge if the players do wish to explore Skarda's palace. This is bound to cause a lot of confusion as the map will be used later. Alternatively, it suggested that the DM use any other palace map at his disposal. The military encampment houses Skarda's 500-man army and stables for 200 horses. Skarda has overbuilt, so many of these buildings are empty. The buildings are not mapped or detailed, but one presumes that the PCs will not be able to investigate the area easily without confronting this army. There's a coliseum used to entertain Skarda and his men and to punish any unruly slaves. Attendance to games at the coliseum is compulsory, so there are presumably times when the entire population of 3,500 are here and the rest of the plane is empty. The northwestern area, reminiscent of a gulag or a prison camp, houses 3,000 slaves in 90 identical single-story tenement buildings. The slave quarters are a poverty-ridden slum, and I think that more effort could have been made to make the area interesting. Perhaps winding streets, ramshackle houses squeezed together, all interspersed with guard towers and ruined hovels, which have previously collapsed due to poor construction. Again, the map does nothing to inspire the DM, and the description, like the rest of the areas, is not particularly evocative. I must keep reminding myself that all these areas are perpetually lit by continual light. Perhaps that in itself makes the place more oppressive. The vast population of this plane is supported by the farms here. The farm's existence is questionable on a place without soil, And the explanation is up to the DM. Either the crops grow because of magic, or Skarda has discovered hydroponics. The final area is a quarry, in which the black stone used to build all the buildings here is mined. Like the farmland, the inclusion of such a naturalistic element in a very clearly magical realm breaks the illusion of wonder and shows forced rationalization for the continued existence of the plane's population. I think this map is only really useful to show the relative positions of the different areas and their size. The exact size and positions of the buildings will probably not come into play. To solve the question of how 300 people are fed, watered and housed on this plane is done in such a dull way, it detracts from the fantastic idea presented in the module. Instead of a world within a mirror, a place of magical possibility, the DM is presented with a mile-long box interior with reflective textures on the walls, floors and ceiling. There are no qualities to the mirror world that will excite the players, and the naturalism drains all excitement from the place. The problems with supporting the vast population here could have been solved by more magical means, and in my mind, a land of mirrored hills and trees with glass-like rivers is more fantastical than what is presented. Part of Skarda's power could be the fact that he has discovered a way to manipulate the energies of the plane and create life here or change the materials within the plane. Finally, since there are no mirror-like qualities of the plane, why not simply have somewhat of a normal land here and dispense with the mirror gimmick entirely? Alternatively, Skarda has previously used the mirror to kidnap whole villages before now. Why not simply abscond with food, livestock, building supplies and so on during his raids, negating the need for farming and quarrying altogether? One questions why Skarda has such a large population of slaves within his plane anyway. It is stated that they work to provide food for the army, but it seems 3,000 slaves providing food for 500 soldiers is unnecessary and will drain resources themselves. Why not kill most of them and leave enough slaves to maintain the army, capturing more as required during raids? Now, let us not forget the railroad that the players find themselves on. After being overpowered and captured, the PCs will find themselves thrown in the dungeons beneath Skarda's palace. Their equipment is taken from them, though there is a 1 in 6 chance that they have concealed a small item such as a ring or a lockpick set. It is not clear why Skarda imprisons the PCs instead of killing them. They have no use to him and only serve as a liability. After being taken to the dungeons, the PCs are lightly abused by the unpleasant guard before being shackled. The PCs will of course attempt to escape, but not until they are introduced to a helpful NPC who is able to provide an info dump to set up subsequent events. Unfortunately for the PCs, in their shackled state, they will be unable to escape from the exposition payload. Skarda's plan is revealed at this point. He intends to sneak his army into Stefan Karameikos' palace and overthrow the Duke. The PCs are told of the resistance movement within the slave quarters that can be utilised to defeat the soldiers guarding the portal. A turncoat officer of Skarda's army will provide the password, so all the PCs need to do is escape this dungeon and make their way to the slave quarters. This is not an elegant way of setting up the next stage of the adventure, and players may be quite annoyed at the way that they will be captured, disarmed, and then directed to their next objective. Decision-making has been taken out of the player's hands, and that is something that can lead to boredom. There are 2 pages of detail on how PCs can go about escaping. This could be quite an interesting and fun stage of the adventure, but of course, if things go wrong, the PCs may end up recaptured. As well as quietly overcoming guards, there are additional challenges suggested which have a chance of triggering an alarm, such as a mad prisoner grabbing at the passing character, spiders dropping onto a hiding PC who may cry out in fear, other prisoners shouting alarm. These little events have no rules associated with them, but help to remind the DM of some small non-combat complications that can make the breakout tenser. Of course, if a breakout sounds too tedious, the module suggests triggering an earthquake, which allows for easy exit as the guards run in fear. There is a legitimate reason why an earthquake may occur, but it still feels like Deus ex machina. The map of the dungeon area is nice and clear, though not very interesting. There are two ways out of the dungeon, one through a back door and another to the bottom floor of the palace. Again, it is such a surprise that the palace was not mapped, as there is a strong chance the PCs will end up there. The only enemies in the dungeon are soldiers, which is to be expected, I suppose, but there is certainly a place for monsters and some traps in a wizard dungeon, I think. In the next section of the adventure, the PCs find themselves in the slave quarter, known by the occupants as Hell. After meeting with resistance members, the PCs learn that Skarda has already travelled to Duke Karameikos' palace, and his army are massing near the portal, ready to attack. In addition, the quarry and wells of the plain have started to flood, the water level continually rising. The DM will learn here that Skarda's quarrying in the mirror has interfered with the delicate magical and ecological balance created by this world's fabricator, and that the floods are a precursor for the destruction of the entire plane. Though a little ham-fisted, this is quite a good plot device as it introduces an additional time limit to the PCs, on top of the threat of the Duke's overthrow. With all the explanation out of the way, the players now have the opportunity to orchestrate a rebellion. The players will have about 100 fighters at their disposal and potentially hundreds more slaves. The DM is suggested to determine the likelihood of success of the player's plan, then roleplay or battle the outcomes. A sample plan is included as well in case the players need some additional help. This is the first time in the adventure that the players are really given some agency. The rising water level and occasional earthquake can be used to hurry dithering parties. This section of the adventure could be hard work for the DM, depending on the craziness of the player's plan. Still, there is fairly solid advice here on how to manage the situation, and both the DM and players know what the objective is. The final climax of this scene could be a great battle between the slaves and the soldiers. The PCs may alternatively be sneaking to the portal. Either way, the portal opens and Skarda's army enters it into Duke Karameikos' palace. It may be necessary to check out the rules for mass combat. In this section is reiterated that Skarda's palace does not have a map, but here there is a brief description of what treasure may be found inside, as well as a list of treasures that could be found. The haul is quite significant, but the subsequent text reveals that treasure wasn't the point of this adventure anyway. The final episode of the adventure sees the PCs repelling the attack by Skarda's army within the walls of the Duke's hunting lodge. Unfortunately for Skarda, the Duke was in his country estate rather than his palace. The map of the hunting lodge is annoying in that none of the rooms quite line up to the grid. Perhaps realistic, but not convenient. The lodge is under attack as the PCs arrive, so they are plunged straight into combat. It is a chaotic situation, and if the DM is able to handle it, this should be an exciting climax to the adventure. Each room has only a brief description of its contents, and no read-aloud text. This is fine as the PCs will not have time to inspect the rooms. The DM is advised to place encounters with enemy soldiers as he pleases, gradually showing the players how their actions are swaying the tide of battle. Eventually, the PCs will face Skarda and a small retinue of elite soldiers. The encounter is supposed to be exciting, and the text advises the DM to fudge rolls to keep Skarda alive for as long as possible. Blasphemous advice. Once Skarda is dead, the characters will discover the mirror, cast onto the ground. Moments later, the earth shakes, the mirror cracks, spraying shards around, and everything not native to the mirror world appears across the surrounding acres of land. That means the remaining population inside the mirror, tools, weapons, horses, crops, doors, and corpses are suddenly sprawled across the countryside. When I first read this entry, I thought it meant that all this stuff was violently expelled from the mirror, exploding like a bomb. That would perhaps be a bit too dramatic and grisly. After saving the Duke, the characters can name their own reward, so long as the Duke is able to grant it and it doesn't exceed 10,000 gold pieces in total per character. The module goes out of its way to make it difficult to claim Skarda's treasure, which presumably would appear outside the mirror like everything else. If this did happen, the ex-slaves have taken it in the chaos after the battle. The text is very confusing about this point, stating earlier in the adventure that Skarda had at least 15,000 gold pieces in his palace. It is later stated, there was never any gigantic treasure in Skarda's possession, and in the following paragraph saying that the Duke uses all of Skarda's gold to import food to feed the freed slaves. However it pans out, the PCs aren't getting any of it. After this, there are stats for all the NPCs and the Mirror Fiend, followed by a section on how to continue the adventure if things go wrong. This means if characters die or if they fall off the railroad. This section is very telling, as it makes it clear that the players should follow the story in a specific way, and if they don't, then things have gone wrong. While the advice given isn't terrible, one wonders whether the adventure could have been accomplished without the rigid story. The most egregious part of the adventure is the capture of the PCs, which must occur in order for the adventure to continue. There are suggestions on running the adventure in different ways, including having the PCs take the place of the captured Retamaron and being involved in events from the beginning. One questions why the adventure wasn't written on this premise in the first place. This is a module from the late 80s, and it is more of a story to be played through rather than a situation to be overcome. I much prefer the style of earlier modules that present a site or situation in which a story emerges from player actions. But of course, as we all know now, that type of design went out of fashion long ago. The story presented in this adventure is not especially bad, and despite the railroading and theft of player agency in places, there are much more egregious examples in other modules. Despite my criticisms, various blogs seem to have warm feelings towards this adventure, suggesting that in play the module works out well. Having not played through the module myself, I cannot confirm whether my analysis is wrong or if it's a case of nostalgia on the part of others. I don't think it's a bad module. Each section is thematically different, from the survival horror of Retamaron's tower, a prison escape, the intrigue of fomenting a slave uprising, and finally a dramatic battle with significant consequences. However, each area is bland, opting for naturalism instead of fantasy. The mirror plane is especially disappointing in this regard. The module has a heroic feeling to it, and Skarda can be quite an unlikable antagonist, especially if you are to play up the depraved conditions that his slaves are living in. In terms of usability, there are several problems which need to be overcome. Monster stats appear only for a few creatures in the tower. For NPCs, not even hit points are listed in room descriptions, so either print off the appendix or expect some page flipping. Room descriptions usually feature dull, read-aloud text and unnecessary information. I'm not particularly happy with the maps, which lack interesting features such as looping sections, multiple entrances and exits, or obstacles and dynamic elements. Aside from the magical mirror, there are no unique magic items, and the selection of treasure is very poor. Skarda's hoard is not really meant to be claimed. There are no wandering monster tables for the tower or dungeon, and enemy orders of battle are limited, though the tactics of the Mirror Fiend are well defined. The module does have a time limit and consequences if the PCs are too slow. This is great and will help to motivate the players into action. Overall, Skarda's Mirror presents some really good ideas and thematically different sections, but could have been much better executed. Railroading and naturalism are the two biggest issues with this adventure, but both can be overcome with a little rewriting. The question is whether it is worth your time to do so. Have you played this module before? If so, what did you think? Let me know in the comments. I'll be very interested to know your opinions. And as always, thanks for watching.